So firstly, I would like to welcome you all and thank you for joining us to celebrate the launch of Hearing Our Needs. We appreciate that each of you has taken the time to join us to celebrate the launch of this unique and important research, Hearing Our Needs, which explores the mental health and emotional well-being of Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities living in Northern Ireland. This research is a collaboration between academia and the voluntary sector and involves many people from different backgrounds, experiences, occupations and situations, talking to, listening to each other and communicating with each other, and perhaps that's something special in itself. Hearing Our Needs is primarily about people, about this place, about mental health and emotional well-being. All of these themes are huge and challenging. Everyone has an opinion, and lots is said in private conversation and public discourse. But we had little evidence about the experiences of people from other places living here. The Hearing Our Needs research, led by Dr. Kumar, who is also the chair of Counselling All Nations, saw the need for an examination of our situation here, the importance of hearing the voices of all communities from other places living in all parts of Northern Ireland. Dr. Kumar will present the research, but before that, I am delighted to introduce our guest speakers who have so generously given their time today. We have with us Professor Stuart Elborn, Interim Provost and Deputy Vice-Chancellor of Queen's University here, and by courtesy of modern technology, Professor Siobhan O'Neill, who is Professor of Mental Health Sciences at the University of Ulster and Mental Health Champion for Northern Ireland, and Her Excellency Dame Fionnuala J. O'Boyle, who is Lord Lieutenant of the County Borough of Belfast. So firstly, I would like to introduce Professor Stuart Elborn, Faculty Pro-Vice-Chancellor, Centre for Experimental Medicine, Institute for Health Sciences, School of Medicine, Dentistry and Biomedical Sciences here at Queen's. Prior to this, amongst other posts, he has held many senior clinical positions in Belfast and Imperial College and Royal Brompton in London. He is a well-established international leader in healthcare, having led research and driven change in healthcare delivery in fields of cystic fibrosis and bronchiectasis, in other words, chest medicine. In his research, he endeavours to bring scientists and clinicians together, promoting interdisciplinary research, and has been successful in developing programmes of research across disciplines, hospitals and universities in Northern Ireland, as well as across the UK and Europe. And it seems to me that in these complex, diverse and mobile world that we live in, that collaboration is essential, and those ideals are so relevant to hearing our needs. So now I would like to invite Professor Elborn to address us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Linda, and thank you to Satish and team for the kind invitation of coming to say a few words here, and thank you for coming to Queen's to launch this really important review. I'm, as you've heard, a medic by background and have been actually really involved in mental health and well-being in people with cystic fibrosis over a number of years, and working with colleagues from psychiatry, psychology, social care, have really made a deep dive into the mental health and well-being issues that affect young people with a chronic condition which is life-limiting. And that's really opened my eyes to the critical intersection of mental health and well-being, physical health and flourishing and happiness. In cystic fibrosis, we, over the last 10 years, have developed some really effective, exciting new drugs that have really changed the lives of people with this condition. And as a clinical scientist, I wanted to measure breathing tests and blood tests and weight and even quality of life. I thought was a bit kind of on the edge. But going through that process and being part of that development, something really profound came across from the young people that were feeling the difference. They shifted from being hopeless about the future to having hope for the future. And that's kind of around, I think, all of society. I'm not being party political here, but interestingly, when Keir Starmer was here recently and in his address to the Labour Party for this year, he really emphasised the importance of hope for society. And if you don't have hope, you do not flourish. And Aristotle, I think, observed this and talked about a flourishing society. I'm a scientist, so I don't really understand philosophy, but Aristotle clearly articulated way back that mental health and well-being, which he kind of called happiness, but I think that's what we now call mental health, good mental health and well-being, was critical for a flourishing society. There are geopolitical, socioeconomic issues around that as well, but it's so important that we consider the well-being of our population, because then our individuals will flourish and our society will flourish. And in some ways, Dean Funula, I think that's the job of politicians, isn't it? To help us do that and to do that better. So as we go through some of the detail of this, you'll hear about some of the fantastic work that's been undertaken by the CANS team and the group from Queen's who've worked with CANS. And I think the intersection of academia, third sector and public sector is really important in our society. If we're going to support the mental health and well-being of our society, we need to have teams working together, and so the co-production of this is critically important, and I'll come back to that in a moment. This report focuses on the challenges for individuals and communities that are not part of the dominant culture, finding access to the right interventions and the right care when they're a smaller group within that particular society. And in Northern Ireland, our future is in diversity, and I think it's really important that we learn how to support those who are not from the dominant communities here, and learn how to support with sensitivity, with cultural appropriateness, in terms of both prevention of disease and impact on well-being, and then having the right interventions delivered by the right people in the right places at the right time. And that's quite tricky to do, but is really explored very well in this excellent report. So I really want to commend the report to you. It's taken some time for this to really mature, and there have been many challenges over the last number of years which have changed our understanding of mental health and well-being. The pandemic, I think we have learned a lot from, and it's really important that we take some of those learnings as to how we support, how we interact with other people at times of stress and crisis, because we were, as a society, under stress, and most of us as individuals were under some stress, and I think we learned how to support each other much better. And I think learning how to do that for individuals from a variety of cultural and ethnic backgrounds is really important for our society. The co-production of this report has been important. It's been co-produced by service providers, service users, academics around it, and I think is much the richer for that co-production. What is the next challenge in this is the co-delivery and the co-production of a plan to ensure that the excellent observations, feedback and directions that are given in this are translated into delivery. in the last number of years, again, I kind of come late to things, but I've learned a bit about policy. I thought policy, this is really important, but actually policy is really important if you deliver it, if you make it real, if you implement it to individuals and to communities. So I think there's a real challenge now of not just understanding the needs, but now meeting the needs. So you've heard the needs. The next challenge for all of us in this room is to develop policy and then delivery to ensure people from non-dominant cultures do get the right support to prevent mental health issues, and when they are developed, that they get the right interventions by the right people. We are really committed to that in Queen's, and I know colleagues in Ulster are similarly committed to do that for our students and staff. And the two universities now are real drivers of the fantastic diversity that's developing in Northern Ireland, with many international students and staff coming from all over the world to study and work here. We're committed to doing that, and we will learn from this report in how we support our colleagues and students from a diversity of backgrounds, and I'm absolutely certain our colleagues in Ulster will do the same. But we also, I think, have a responsibility as universities to be both pioneers and role models in our societies. We need to try some things, do some pilots, try to figure out good ways to do this, and then share that with colleagues in the healthcare system, in the charity sector, and work together to try to work out the best ways of providing that support. So the first stage is done. There's still more heavy lifting to do, Satish, and I look forward to being involved in some of this and supporting colleagues to get involved to make sure that we deliver for our society, because we want and are determined in Northern Ireland to have a flourishing society, a society that is fair, supportive, and provides opportunity for individuals to flourish and for communities to flourish right across these counties. So thank you for coming, thank you for listening, and I'll pass back to Linda.
Thank you very much. There are a lot of big words in there. Hope, flourish, future and diversity, a lot to think about, and I think it definitely reflects the ethos and the ethos of what we talk about and aspire to. Unfortunately, Professor Siobhan O'Neill was unable to join us in person, but has kindly sent us a recorded message. As I say, she is the mental health champion for Northern Ireland, and her research focuses on trauma, mental illness and suicidal behaviour in Northern Ireland and the transgenerational transmission of trauma. As mental health champion, she focuses on improving mental health of people here by promoting evidence-based services and also promoting health and well-being in all policies and services throughout the provinces. So thanks to the wonders of modern technology, we can now hear from Professor O'Neill.
So I'm so sorry I can't join you all today for this lovely event, but I'm glad to have the opportunity to say a few words of support as mental health champion. I'm delighted that you're launching the Hearing Our Needs report today. This is the first time we've had a detailed, comprehensive review of the needs of Black and minority ethnic groups in Northern Ireland. And for me, it's so important that we have that so that we can start to shape mental health services here so that the needs of this population can be met. We know that minority groups in Northern Ireland face significant additional stressors here, and they have more experience of trauma. And indeed, as a trauma researcher, I'm concerned about the impact of that trauma on mental health in this group. So the evidence-based report is such an important resource for me as a work in policy and also for me as a researcher. It really is key to understanding the challenges faced by specific communities. And as we shape our mental health services in line with the mental health strategy and create a regional mental health service, we must make sure that that service is equipped to meet the needs of Black and minority ethnic groups here. And that includes those facing challenges of discrimination, racism, inequality. All of those are barriers to accessing mental health services, as well as factors that impact on the mental health of this group. So I'm going to champion the culturally sensitive mental health services that we need. And as we roll out the strategy, make sure that the services are fit for purpose and can help meet the needs of your group. So thank you so much for all the work that you've put in so far. And I look forward to having those important conversations in the future.
And we're very appreciative to Professor Neil for her support. And I'm delighted now to introduce our final speaker before the presentation of the research, Her Excellency Dame Fionnuala J. O'Boyle, the Lord Lieutenant of the County Borough of Belfast. She's a graduate student in political science and history from Queen's University and was active in student politics, I understand, serving as Vice President of the Students' Union and Regional Convener of the National Union of Students UK and the Union of Students in Ireland. She's an acknowledged expert in the fields of heritage-led regeneration and community development and has lectured, written and broadcast in these areas. In 1995, she founded the Belfast Buildings Trust, a registered cross-community charity that rescues and regenerates historic buildings for community benefit. She has received many prestigious awards for her work and public service, including December 2022 when Queen's University conferred the honorary degree of Doctor of Laws upon her for outstanding distinction in public service. So now I would like to invite you to address us. Thank you.
Deputy Vice-Chancellor, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Tell me, who among us does not wish the place that we call home to be welcoming, to be inclusive, to be respectful, and to be kind, particularly when we are feeling vulnerable or exposed? Who among us doesn't wish to know that should we need help with our mental health, that it will be available, not only in a kind way, but in a way that is culturally appropriate? I'm sorry that my schedule today allows me only the briefest of visits with you, but I felt it hugely important. And as Lord Lieutenant of the City and County Borough of Belfast, and the personal representative of His Majesty the King, that I come and recognise the important and timely nature of this report. And I want also to congratulate its authors on their contribution to a hugely important discussion. The demographic change in this city, and indeed in Northern Ireland in the last decade, has been staggering. The economic, social and cultural contribution that our BAME communities make to life here is quite simply beyond value. Consequently, it is of absolute importance that we establish and understand what the specific mental health challenges are for the members of these communities and how we should respond accordingly. Now, I do not claim to be an expert in this area. Indeed, I would consider that to be dangerous. But I have, as does His Majesty the King, an enduring interest in building communities that are stable, communities that are cohesive, but most of all, communities that are resilient. And in this week that has just seen the celebration of Commonwealth Day, you may have seen the wonderful scenes from Westminster Abbey. it strikes me that CANS, this organisation, has recognised that true resilience is also about knowing that Northern Ireland's BAME community has the power, but also the responsibility for its own mental well-being. And I further believe that the conclusions and recommendations of this report are informed not only by the desire to promote well-being, but to effectively eliminate barriers, reduce racial inequalities, and work towards building a community that works for everyone in Northern Ireland, and not just our BAME residents. The arrival of many new ethnic communities, refugees and asylum seekers has contributed greatly to the diversity of life here. But it has also given way to significant challenges, most particularly around integration and access to opportunities. Intolerance and envy are no strangers in Northern Ireland, but it is still staggering to learn that 42% of survey respondents in this report have had direct experience of hate crime. And for this, as your Lord Lieutenant, I want to apologise wholeheartedly, because our BAME community are as much this city as Professor Elbourne, as myself, as everyone here in this room is. Everything you bring, everything you give, make us who we are, what we are. And we are deeply fortunate to have you here with your skills, your talents, and the vibrancy you give. It struck me that on Friday of this week, we will also celebrate the Feast of St. Patrick, Ireland's national saint. And you know, it's often forgotten that Patrick himself was a migrant, a man who came to this place and overcame the challenges he faced, a man who found a different and a better way of doing things. And it is my hope that this report will start the process of doing much of the same. So in conclusion, may I again congratulate the authors of Hearing Our Needs. I thank everyone who responded or participated, and I look to the future when individuals can fully realise his or her potential with appropriate support where and when required. This is a very, very important contribution to building a more stable, diverse and kind Northern Ireland. It is truly to be welcomed. Congratulations to you all.
I think we all, as our speakers have alluded to, a vision of a better society to come. There are challenges in developing policy that is good and robust, and possibly then the bigger challenge of translating that into delivery, and that is often where things can get difficult and challenging, but we must keep at it. Satish is coming back, which I'm pleased to see. Dr. Satish Kumar, Senior Lecturer in the School of Natural and Built Environment at Queen's. He is an interdisciplinary global scholar with wide-ranging research interests globally. Satish has served on the board of CANS for some years and has recently been elected our chair. Our previous chair, Dr. Salim Tareen, is a psychiatrist in the Northern Trust, and sadly he is leaving Northern Ireland to go to England, and we are delighted that Dr. Kumar has taken on the chair of the board of CANS. He tells me that when he arrived in Queen's in 2000, there were maybe about 5 Indian students. Today, there are more than 1,500 Indian students. And I think that little snippet of information says so much about time and place in the last quarter of a century in Northern Ireland. So thank you, Satish, for leading this research and now for presenting it. Thank you.
Thank you. So thank you very much. Thank you very much for the opportunity to share the report with all of you. We just had a fantastic sort of response to the report from Dame Fionnuala O'Boyle and also from Siobhan O'Neill and also from our Deputy Vice Chancellor, Professor Stuart Elburn. So today what I'm going to do now is to just give you a very quick run through what this report is all about, hearing our needs and really understanding the significance. So welcome to all the colleagues, students, and also, ladies and gentlemen, this report is one of the most important reports that I worked on, and it helped me to understand the significance of this report. So yeah, as I said, I start by looking at this dialogue. Can you hear me? Okay. It looks at the whole dialogue which I introduced from Daisaku Ikeda. Our dialogues must heed the voices of suffering. They must replace despair with hope. The beauty of empathy is that it allows us to see the world from another person's viewpoint and to appreciate our thoughts and emotions, actions and reactions in a given situation. It puts us in a position to comprehend that those feelings of isolation, vulnerability, and voicelessness are there every day. Whilst we all may not have mental illness, we all have mental health and different thresholds to stress and change. And outlining such differences and adjustments is necessary towards adequate treatment. So Hearing Our Needs is a project initiated in late May 2019 by Counselling All Nations and supported by National Lottery Fund is an active provider of mental health interventions to diverse communities in Belfast and Greater Belfast, and which sought to further understand the mental health and emotional well-being needs of Black, Asian, minority ethnic communities across Northern Ireland. So comprising of 7 workshops across Northern Ireland, the research team invited participants from a range of areas. So it came from a range of backgrounds, including emergency services, counsellors, community leaders, academics, union representatives, and politicians, and others to join the conversations and make their voices heard. These workshops were held chronologically in Dungannon, Derry-Londonderry, Coleraine, Belfast, Bangor, Enniskillen, and Newry. The methodology for the workshop was structured by 3 key questions. Are we getting mental health needs right with increasing diversity of population and communities? How are we getting the mental health needs right for the benefit of those communities? And how can we move forward together? At the end of each session, we invited participants to voice their recommendations for moving forward. I was very lucky and very fortunate that I had both Lekhan, who is part of CANS, as well as Nola and Stephen Donnelly, my PhD student, to join me in this exercise across the board. Participants voiced issues with regard to adequate training and skilled worker retention, and also talking about ring-fenced sustainable funding streams, accessibility to pathways to healing, including self-referrals, the cultural competence and sensitivity to cultural issues, communication barriers between public sector and community workers, and the need for centralised regulation and more efficient signposting. The urban-rural differences came out quite significantly in this discussion, especially for the mental health needs. More importantly, the access to data was really addressed, because some of the big challenges we face working in Northern Ireland is the lack of data, lack of granular data. And I think in 2001 or 2, I had an opportunity to work on a paper called Mapping of Madness in Colonial India. And at that time, when I was looking at the data, it was quite fascinating that you had all of that data in 1872. And we were able to look at across the subcontinent of undivided India how this actually worked. But today we have big challenges in even getting access to the most granular data to make policy decisions. So looking at the data access, data sharing, co-designing, and co-production of strategic documents relevant to BAME mental health. So 4 key themes emerged organically with this exercise. Sorry, I think we're stuck there. So 4 things emerged from this: building capacity, so looking at building capacity, securing service provisions, co-production and networking, and also linking some of these to the Sustainable Development Goals. Coming from Queen's, we have adopted the Sustainable Development Goals as a mandate institutionally across our curriculum as well. So I was quite keen to see how that Sustainable Development Goals really gets embedded within the framework that we presented in the report. And also understanding why place matters. Sometimes we forget that place matters when it comes to mental health. And where you are located, exactly which space you're occupying, also has huge impact on mental health. So we really try to bring all of those elements together. So securing service provisions. So securing service provisions of sustainable, flexible funding was a major priority shared by all groups present in the workshop. When raised as a discussion point during how are we getting it right in the workshops, data availability, its usage, and conceptualization of data brought mixed responses. There was a unanimous agreement about the importance of information. What information do we have about minority ethnic groups and the data and their requirements? So that came out very strongly. So despite the fact that we have huge statistical research associations in Northern Ireland, the deficiency of data was again highlighted in the analysis. Place matters was again quite interesting, and here again geography plays a big role in place matters. Let's see if I can get it. So geography again plays a key role in why place matters, and the place and public are significant influencers in mental health interventions and general well-being. They highlighted the inadequacies of some GP practices to tackle BAME and minority ethnic issues more so in rural areas, and the need to introduce new structures and training to empower BAME mental health interventions within these areas. Some service users felt that GP surgeries possessed a professional prejudice and lacked the time and capacity to intervene effectively, overcoming language and cultural barriers, age-based and gender-based needs, and call on translational services despite available funding and resource pool to call upon. So there were big challenges that we were exposed to. Participants emphasized the need to introduce local champions to raise awareness about ethnic community needs and mental health concerns in the area, acting as a conduit of confidence between the locals and the communities they serve. For the service provider, digital world is an invaluable communication, invaluable access tool for creating partnerships and collaborations with other active bodies in Northern Ireland and across the world. It's very easy to do that. We saw that happening during the pandemic. But for the service users, that was not enough. They wanted to have the face-to-face associations, connections, which they felt was much more than an impersonalized digital access. So that's again quite interesting to see as we move forward, how do we balance the hybrid aspects of counselling as well. So co-production, networking, working together, the participants of the workshop who worked at the community level emphasized the communicative barriers between them and the government agencies, despite the government agencies working within their guidelines. Aside from communication barriers, they also voiced a lack of appropriately trained personnel, the lack of understanding of particular cultures in some institutions, competing for resources, and the need for regulation through forming an intercultural group that embodies the principles and visions of the communities in Northern Ireland. Participants discussed the value of cultural sensitivity and competency and its contribution to wider decision-making and co-designing documents with the government bodies and other charities and at the legislative levels with the executive. So many recommendations, at least 12 recommendations have been highlighted. I don't want to go into too much details on those recommendations, but again, targeted, empowered decision-making, enhanced and culturally sensitive training are some of the areas that they emphasized. We also did 2 surveys. One survey was looking for the feedback from the workshops, the 7 workshops, but we also had asked a small group of respondents about their mental health experience with accessing support in Northern Ireland. Those who responded listed a myriad of ailments affecting them, including depression, anxiety, stress, suicidal thoughts, PTSD, addiction, loneliness, work and relationship issues. So this also required data on ethnicity, age, employment, and residence, what they felt mental health and well-being meant for them, and whether or not they have experienced hate crimes. And 42% experienced forms of hate crime wherever they were. So it became quite important for us to see how one embodies and expresses their cultures through life is significant to their identity. But in the context of mental health interventions, it can leave them misunderstood and voiceless. Thus, cultural lens on mental health and policy reform must recognize that interventions targeting such communities need to be re-evaluated and to consider their needs sensitively and such cultural dynamics at every turn. It raises concerns with regard to cultural knowledge, training, and guidance, and places great weight on the relationship between government bodies, interdisciplinary public and private agencies, and community interest groups and charities towards addressing these issues. In the report produced by the Mental Health Foundation in 2016, Northern Ireland still continues to be severely underfunded compared to other UK regions, despite being a hotspot for mental health issues. Even today, we grapple with our own colleagues and students who suffer from mental health challenges. Whilst data provides us with important insights into mental health crisis, it becomes even more difficult to ascertain centralized information on BAME communities and mental health in Northern Ireland. Conceptualizations of mental health must articulate the cultural constructs of a person that contributes to their reality. Issues and adversities such as class, sex, gender, sexuality, disabilities, education, race, ethnicity, and hierarchies amongst and between groups, conflict, and the accessibility to services all contribute to their perceptions and management of mental health. The intersectionality of gender, ethnicity, and religion together for the BAME allows us to situate an individual or a group in their respective domains. The Jarvis law is very interesting. It states that if correct services and assistance are readily available to a community, they will be utilized. How can we ensure that those services are available to the communities in Northern Ireland? Communicating with someone in your own language whom you share a culture with, and navigating similar value systems create an inviting atmosphere. So, in conclusion, when I try and look at it, Northern Ireland is currently within a paradigm of increased recognition of parity of esteem by way of valuing mental health equally with physical health and widespread mental health awareness among its population. There's still much to do to meet the BAME and minority ethnic groups' mental health needs, and understanding the role that culture and ethnicity play in the recognition, understanding, and treatment of conditions. Culture can distort mental health narratives where certain behaviors can have multiple meanings or stigmatize engagements with professionals, and we have to be mindful of that. So there are 2 perspectives that have come through in terms of service users, someone who is experiencing poor mental health, and that of service providers who can provide professional step care approaches and a myriad of interventions or signposts to other organizations. So in totality, when we look at it, we see that finally the voices of the BAME minority ethnic communities are the spirit of this document. As Nelson Mandela, despite his 27 years of brutal life in prison, emphasized not only obtaining the truth and some reconciliation, but also the need for forgiveness, both for himself and for his country. Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you, Linda. Yes, we had some participants from the younger population as well. So it's quite interesting that that's a whole area of focus. Especially, I was talking to Stuart as well, that if you're looking at the young cohort of students in the universities, there are big challenges there. And I think having a bit more targeted data from students itself will help us in performing and organizing the policies around it. Definitely.
Yes, Stuart?
Satish, education and training comes out in the report. What are the key things that we can learn as universities, for particularly our healthcare professionals training in counselling, psychology, mental health, those professions who will intersect with a diverse community? What more can we do to prepare our students who will be the deliverers and service providers in the future?
Definitely, in terms of our own students, I mean, I'm extremely mindful of the fact that we have a huge cohort of international students, and they don't necessarily, they're very shy. There's a lot of stigma associated with the mental health. So breaking that barrier, raising awareness is really, really crucial for me. So in terms of even having, not necessarily either one-to-one conversation, but as a collective body where they don't feel like they are being singled out for that purpose, but they're getting them to understand that there is huge opportunities available when they come to study away from home. I had access to a lot of my former students, a lot of students across the university who have come to speak to me about the huge challenges they have been facing being in the university away from the family members and having the usual trauma of being separated, which is a huge trauma as well. In terms of the professionals, how we can, I think we already have bodies in place in the university, but integrating them, and I think with CANS being located in South Belfast, we as a university is in South Belfast, perhaps an opportunity to have a space where we can enable our own international students to interact with the professionals will be really good. I think we need to provide services where they are, rather than telling them to go to North or East or South Belfast. Really getting that in place will make a huge difference. And I'm happy to work with the groups to see what we can do in terms of really integrating those elements together. Yes.
Yes.
Hi, I was just looking at the report on 45 surveys per term, but I wonder if there's information on the longer term surveys and the barriers that people face to engaging. And I think there must be information there which tells some interesting things.
Yeah, in fact, we send it out to almost all of the service users and service providers, and sometimes we find that the language barrier is also always there to fill up. So we were totally dependent on service providers to help us communicate those information. Some of them were able to return that data, some of them did not. So as I said, there's still further funding. We can go out more to the. My hope is that we can spend a lot more time with the service users, because that's where the gaps are, and to really see how can we really encapsulate their perspectives, but also then connecting it to the service providers. So we have that option to do that.
Dr. Satish, what about the professionals from BAME community or ethnic minority communities who are going through work-related traumas? What sort of measures have been put in place for the counsellors to understand the cultural intricacies and also the challenges they face? I think there is definitely a scope there for trust to understand there is challenges in the workplaces, which is 38 hours of your week you're spending there, you're spending with a multi-ethnic, and there's a lot of trauma that goes through it. And just your reflection on that.
Yeah, I mean, thanks for asking that, Steve. At least as an ethnic minority in Northern Ireland, when I came here in '99, things were very different, and today things are much different. I can say from my own experience that I think one of the facts that I was very fortunate is that I was able to integrate with the community across the board, and that gave me a chance to not to stay in silos. So from my own personal experience, I can say that helped me to break barriers. Workplace, yes, workplace, that sort of challenges that you face in a workplace is totally dependent on who's your line manager, who sort of people are there, and what challenges you face as an individual. And I think all individuals, doesn't have to be ethnic minorities, all individuals face challenges. But the challenges for the ethnic minorities are much more because they don't know how to respond. I'll just give you an example. When students come, some of the brightest students come to the university, they don't have an understanding of what plagiarism is, because it's quite easy to cut and paste it because it's normal, even for the local students. But unless we tell them that that's not right, they don't get it. So the same thing is that, to be able to take that to the step, there are procedures in place, there are policies in place. If there's a violation, and today's BBC talks about someone who's got 19,000-20,000 pounds for her harassment, that's something which we can always be mindful. So as an institution, how institutions are geared towards those regulatory policies are really important to deal with.
Yep.
Sorry, Kathleen.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like what else?
Yes, so I'm part of the parish prevention of suicide, so we're always looking at how we try to take away the barriers for people in the community. And one of the things we've done, we've introduced a piece on our website that we can translate the website in 14 different languages. But we know we can do more. So for me, it's like, what are the next steps? What for organisations that are trying to do better? What are the next steps for us? And is it more research, particularly question around young people? We are coming into schools and facing challenges that everyone faces, but also that added layer. How do we support those young people and adapt our programs to take in cultural and religious differences that are prevalent?
Thank you. In fact, that's one of the big challenges we face in the universities as well. And as I just gave the example that we have international students coming here, not just from one country, from many countries. So dealing with them is a real, even if you look at some of the students who are not able to perform up to the level that they need to, we find that it adds huge trauma and stress to them. And they're dependent on the funding that is coming from home. It doesn't get it in time, etc. So there are huge challenges. And like I said, getting that data right, being able to pick that information, to be having really evidence-based information and approach is really crucial, because that's what we've been addressing in this report. How can we have evidence-based approach to these challenges? And then once we know that is there, we can, just to give you an example, we have, when students are not performing well in the exams, in the university system, any institution, they have an opportunity to appeal. I say, if you look at the list of people who are making the appeals because they're not being able to perform up to their standards, we can ask that question. We look at the attainment of a student and say, how are they performing? If they've come with a first-class degree and they're going back with a not-so-good degree, what's happening there? There must be something which is not right. And I think catching those issues, capturing those information are really critical for policy purposes.
There's someone else here with
Yes,
a question.
Kathleen.
Thank you, Dr. Mark. It's an interesting research report. Can I ask what services you provide for refugees, asylum seekers? They are two groups I work with daily, and very often we find that we're excluded from service supports from statutory services because of a lack of settled status. So are you guys able to provide support to refugees and asylum seekers? And if not, what more can we do to agitate, I suppose, for better social justice for the most vulnerable?
Linda, would you like to say that? Go on.
I think Satesha's handed this over to me. For those of you who don't work my day job, I work as a GP. And for 25 years, well, I suppose since we started getting some immigration here, I've been particularly interested in that group of people. Clarity, I know there's a lot of very well-informed people in the room. When I'm teaching medical students, a few things clear. Once you're claiming asylum, you're entitled to full NHS services. Now, I appreciate there's bigger issues around access and all sorts of, and how people present, the complexity of that and everything. Okay? Don't start me. I could talk a long time. It's very complex. Service providers also have our challenges and our boundaries and our limitations. From the point of view, and I appreciate there is work to be done there, and nobody's good bad. There's a lot of work to be done. I think it's good the more evidence we get. From the point of view of Counselling All Nations, we work with a lot of asylum seekers and refugees. Our funding to date, and I'm sure our ex-chair Dr. Salim and Lekan has, can certainly be happy to speak to you personally later, any of us. But in general, as we started, our main funding stream was through the Trust GP referral, and that provided us with the 6 sessions of Tier 2 services. Sorry for jargon for people who aren't maybe familiar with this. What we would have found is that a lot of those patients who were referred as Tier 2 actually had much bigger needs. All the cultural reasons, maybe why it presented, why it did. So we've done a lot of work in Counselling All Nations and getting funding to provide extension to an initial, and we are working on increasing our referral pathways. We would love to be able, I think now I'm going to speak possibly and have it would be lovely for the board to say to Lekan, open the doors, open referral. We cannot sustain that. We have some of our counsellors here, and having spent 24 hours on an away time with the board and counsellors, all our counsellors are from other places. They're all bilingual, they're all highly trained to much higher tier. They're all trained in trauma work and EMDR, and we must protect them. Because as anyone working in the sector of trauma and mental illness knows, we must look after those providing that service. So the board's priority is very much growth in a sustainable manner, because one of our key, we've recently done strategic planning, and the quality of our service is certainly core. We have plenty of our counsellors and therapists here. They are passionate about delivering a quality service. And when you get down, Stuart mentioned developing good policy, and then the challenge comes in making it into real work on the ground. And it is hard because the need is so great. So yes, we're working on referral pathways. We want to increase that. We would also like to upskill other places. We have looked at Dr. Salim has done a lot of work, or has done some work in training. And that is coming, all our counsellors and therapists are bilingual, they all come from other places, so we have been looking at training as well. And I think as Northern Ireland, the more we educate ourselves and train ourselves, so actually it's not just a little niche service, it actually starts to spread out and becomes the norm. Is that an answer? It's okay? Thank you. Okay, I think maybe we're up to time. So thank you, Dr. Kumar. It's become very clear to me that hearing our needs is just the start, as all the questions have suggested, as of course that is the case. Lots of specific groups to think about, lots of complexity to deal with, but we go for it, I think. There are so many people who made today's launch possible, and I'm aware of time. So particularly, I would like to thank our guest speakers for giving us their time and their talent. Professor Stuart Elburn, who is still with us, Professor O'Neill, and we will be reporting back how well she was received, and Dame Fanula J. O'Boyle. Those who made hearing our needs possible, the researchers and every single person who participated in a focus group, especially the researchers like Anabasi from Cairns, Stephen Donnelly from Queen's, who can't be here, Professor Kumar and Nuala McCarthy Kumar, who coordinated focus groups, particularly Queen's University for supporting the research and planning this launch, and particularly the support in the food and the photography. Much appreciated. And Counselling All Nations, our founder and clinical coordinator, Lekan Abbasi, the other staff, the counsellors, you all know themselves, and as I've mentioned about them, they are all from BAME communities themselves. And they are more aware than most of us of the situation on the ground as they see the needs in their work and in their communities. And thank you to everyone here and to our supporters, who all know who you are. And I think we have representatives from PwC, PHA, Health Trusts, Queen's. Thank you for coming, for showing up, for your past support, and I hope support going forwards as this develops. We live in this little part of the world. We have changed, especially in the past 25 years. We are enriched that we have become a country not just of emigration, but also of immigration more than ever before. Hearing our needs starts with a quote from the Buddhist philosopher Daisaku Ikeda. I was checking that on Google and I haven't got it right, sorry, apologies. Who said, "Our dialogues must heed the voices of the suffering, they must replace despair with hope," as Satish mentioned. So hearing our needs, 7 workshops, 3 questions, 4 themes, 12 recommendations. You have them in front of you, and that is just the beginning. And I'd like to give the final word to a participant from one of the focus groups, who said, "Capacity building starts with the need to educate ourselves about each other." And I think that is something we can all do. Thank you all very, very much.